My name is Carol Rowley. I'm NCFI's Global Saline Coordinator. I'm happy to greet you at this 2022 PACEA Regional Conference, and I'm also happy to welcome you to this taster presentation on saline process. For this presentation, I'm joined by Lee Fen from Taiwan, Kinan from Indonesia, and Ferna from New Zealand. We hope that you find this presentation informative, encouraging, and helpful. And now, with no further delay, I'm going to turn this presentation over to Lee Fen, who will tell us a little bit more about the saline process.
The saline process is a training process that equips Christian healthcare workers to follow God's call to be witnesses. Being a witness of Christ is an identity rather than a task. Salt is great at the right concentration. In medicine, we have an example of importance of regulating the dose of salt. 0.9% saline is a normal, healthy concentration of salt in the circulation. 3% saline must carefully used because it is too salty. On the other hand, in intravenous solutions such as 5% dextrose in water is not useful for resuscitation because it has no salt. By analog, we can be overly aggressive in our approach to our patients, raising their emotion barriers and leaving a bad taste in their mouths. We must regulate the amount of salt we give our patients in consideration of their particular situation in order to achieve the best outcomes for them. How we do that? With regard to their spiritual needs, during the rest of training, we are going to work that out in detail. A guiding principle is that there must be an integration of truth and love in our approach to our patients and our interaction with them. If all Christian healthcare workers were committed to be a witness, we could make a huge impact. Next slide. Jesus said that the Holy Spirit empowers us to be his witness wherever we do throughout the world, and that means going into our healthcare workplace too. In Acts chapter 1 verses 8, as Jesus was leaving earth, he said, "You will be my witness" to his disciples. If we are disciples, we will want to be witness for him as well. But often we are not sure how to do that best, particularly in the place where we work. In our healthcare environments, sometimes it feels uncomfortable. The saline process is a course that can help you develop an understanding of how we can be witness with permission, sensitivity, and respect. The motivation for all we do for God's being with a love of God. So as we love God with all of our hearts, minds, and soul strength, that love will flow out everyone we meet in a day. It is not by overworking, but by overflowing. Let our witness for Christ. This is our identity, our very being. It is not something we are to put on and take off. If it is who we are, being witness for Christ. Journey to faith. In story of Samaria woman in John chapter 4, many from the woman's town come out to Jesus because of her testimony. We are the most opportunity for cultivating and sowing. When we are in our healthcare workplace and as a witness. Cultivating is often the biggest part of the process of being on the journey. Sowing seeds is a smaller part for the triangle, but also very important. And finally, the harvest comes. The most common opportunity we have to be witness in our work involve cultivating and sowing. The primary emphasis of this training is cultivating and sowing. We will also touch on how to effectively give a gospel presentation if a patient comes to harvesting point on the journey. Next slide. In addition to our call to be witness in Acts chapter 1 verses 8, healthcare itself presents a very unique opportunity to give the touch and the truth of Christ. People regularly enter healthcare setting. It's like hospital, office, clinic, by choice or from urgent need. People who also would never think of befriending a Christian could very likely be treated by a Christian healthcare workers. What an amazing opportunity. Francis Graham said, every week, more people walk through the doors of hospitals than through the doors of churches. He also said, when you are healthy, you look out horizontally. But if you are sick and lying down, you look out vertically to God. The challenge we address in setting process training is how to appropriately introduce patients to Jesus. As Christians, we have a responsibility to courageously address spiritual issues and hold high ethical standards while practicing competence medicine.
Thank you, Livan, for explaining that being a nurse or healthcare professional is such an unique opportunity for us. Now I'm going to talk about what prevents me from being an effective witness at work. So actually, there are barriers that could happen in myself and that could happen in our patients. So I'm going to explain about the barriers that could happen in me. So in myself, I can have many things such as I am not confident, I don't have enough time. That's the barriers that within me. So as a healthcare professionals, I should overcome that so that then I can be effective witness at work. But then there's also barriers that are not from me, which is from our patients. So what are the barriers that we have in our patients? So in front of me here, I actually have my models. So I have my patients, and remember that in Saline process, everyone is in their faith journey. So at the end, the results is to be able to see Jesus. As Christian healthcare worker, we already see Jesus. We have Jesus in us, and Jesus called us to be witness. But then our patients haven't seen Jesus yet, or there may be somewhere in their faith journey that we don't know. So we know that our patients could have the emotional barriers, could have the intellectual barriers, and could have the volitional barriers. So these are the things that in nature is the spiritual barriers, which only with the help of God, all these barriers can be removed. So over time, it will be removed, and it's a process. Sometimes when you remove emotional barriers, and then it will come back again. So it's really depending on the work of the Holy Spirit in making all this barrier disappear, so then our patients can have faithful journey with God. So I'm going to talk one by one for the barriers. The first one is the emotional barriers, this one. So our patients have their emotional barriers. This is actually in the stage where our presence is really matter to our patients. Why? Because the emotional barriers is including the phase of denial, the feeling of indifference, the feeling of mistrust and antagonism. This is actually based on all the bad experience that all our patients has in their lives. So we need to build a caring relationship with our patients. So then within the caring relationship, we will be able to overcome the emotional barriers. And this phase in the faith journey is called this cultivating phase. So during this phase, we have to adjust what make them feel denial, what make them feel the mistrust, and then we will be able to remove the emotional barrier. So we need to gain the trust from the patients to us, so that then we will be able to remove the emotional barriers. Once our patients get the trust in us, we will be able then to remove the emotional barriers. Now our patients can move closer to Jesus. Then we have another problem. We need to go to the next barrier that our patients has. So the next barrier is the intellectual barrier. So in intellectual barrier is actually about ignorance, about misconceptions, and about erroneous beliefs. So it's based actually in the mind problem, where people have the flawed understanding about God, about who Christ is. And when you have wrong information, sometimes we need to present the truth. So this phase with our patients is called the sowing phase. So we present the truth to our patients. We look about how we put our trust in Jesus. Like we begin to understand that, oh yeah, the truth about being follower of Jesus, it's a wonderful thing to see when we try to plant the seeds and the person start to understand that, oh yeah, that's what Jesus is. He's actually loving me. He is not as what people said, that he will punish me for my sins, but he actually died on the cross for my sins. So he actually loves me. So once our patients begin to understand that, then we will be able to remove the intellectual barrier. So we remove the intellectual barrier. Our patients gain more understanding about Jesus, about what it is, the love of God, what it is to put their trust in Jesus. But that's not the end, because now we face the last barrier, which is the volitional barriers. So after remove the emotional barriers, after we remove the intellectual barriers, now we are about to remove the volitional barriers. This volitional barrier is actually the very crucial stage where prayer and persuasions is really needed to be ministered to the patients. And this is the phase where we said it is harvesting, where we need to let the patients make the decisions to follow Jesus. But then actually volitional barriers also is the hardest one, because it's about the will. And sometimes when people wants to put their trust in Jesus, make the decisions to follow Jesus, there will be pressures, like social pressures, practical pressures, or just simply unwillingness, like they don't make the decision yet to follow Jesus. So we have to have meaningful discussions, and we have to pray so that God will do his work. God will do his part in moving the volitional barriers, so that our patient will come to the sense of trusting in Jesus. When our patients have made their decision to follow Jesus, then we can remove the volitional barrier. And then at the end, our patients will then meet with Jesus. So that's about the barriers. I'll turn over to the other presenter for the next slides.
Thank you, Keenan. Kia ora. I'm Ferna from Aotearoa, New Zealand. I'm a critical care nurse and a flight air medical nurse working in Wellington. So now we'll move on to consider what helps me to be, emphasis on be, an effective witness at work. During the full Saline course, we take some time to consider our own spiritual vitality, the foundation of how we live. So we need to promote and create a safe environment, and many are open to spiritual discussions if we approach them with permission, sensitivity, and respect. So these are foundational principles in the Saline process. Patients will trust us if we connect with what they care about. In Acts 17, Paul connects with the people of Athens when he notices how and what they worship. So in Acts 17, it talks about how Paul has gone around the city of Athens and he's noticed some of their poets and some of their objects of worship. And he uses that to then move on to talk about who Jesus is. So here in Aotearoa, New Zealand, Māori, our tangata whenua, our people of the land, hold a strong belief that haora, which is well-being, is like a house with 4 strong walls. The walls are whānau, which is family. They are physical. They include the mind, and waura, which is spiritual. So for our Māori patients, spiritual care is as important as their family, their mind, and physical care. So based on this and having a knowledge of Māori culture means that we can offer space for spiritual care, which could include karakia, which is prayer. So for example, in my work as a transport nurse, when I'm transporting a critically ill patient, I can invite their whānau, so I'm including in family, to have a karakia, a prayer prior leaving. And this all helps to create the safe environment. The Saline process suggests 8 tools that are very practical and are truly helpful. It starts with prayer, and this simple but vital step has changed my witness at work. For example, on my way to work each day, I just simply pray that God would use me to be a blessing for my patients. And then questions. How to ask an open question, a question that will lead on to further discussion. And spiritual history is also part of questioning. There's some tools in spiritual history like faith. Do you have a faith? Or what do you have that gives you hope? And it can lead into deeper interaction. For example, one example that I had was I asked a patient's relative if his partner had any faith. She couldn't answer because she was comatose and on a ventilator, respirator. And he said, well, I don't know if she's got a faith. I don't think she's got a faith. I'm not sure. And I handed this over to my colleague who's a non-believer that I'd asked about spiritual spirituality, and he didn't think that that was important. But it must have done something, because a few days later, when I returned to work and I was caring again for the same patient, the husband had requested for the chaplain to be involved and to be present, and he was very open to God being involved in his partner's care. So all these tools address the patient barriers, and as we follow down the list, as people become nearer to seeing God, they move along. So from prayer and sowing through to reaping, which may include the gospel presentation and the spiritual referral team, who may be people from your church, or in the case of a hospital, we have a chaplaincy team. So now we'll look more closely at faith flags and faith stories. What is a faith flag? What is a faith story? So a faith flag is like a flag on a ship. A ship carries two flags. One flag goes at the front of the ship on the bow, and another flag goes on the rear of the ship on the stern. So the flag on the bow is the flag of the country that they are visiting. The flag on the stern is the identity flag, the flag of the country where the ship is from. And that flag doesn't change. So the flag on the front changes as they move from country to country, but the flag on the stern stays the same. And in the same way, our faith flag is our identity in Christ. It shows that we belong to God's family. So for some people, a little faith flag may be a cross on a necklace, or a little dove that pin on your sweater. Or it could be a simple word. So for example, we may have gone through similar trouble to our patient, and we could say, I don't know how I could have managed without God's help. It isn't threatening, it's just identifying, and it's showing that you have some kind of belief in God. The faith flag can sometimes lead into a faith story. One little example I had of this was that I had a young patient, a child, and I noticed that her middle name was Hope. And I said to her father, I said, I've noticed that her middle name is Hope. Does this mean that you have a hope? Does it mean anything to you? And he told me why they called her Hope. He said that when she was a newborn, she was very ill, very sick, and needed an operation. His wife was still recovering from childbirth. She'd had a cesarean. And so he went over to the cafe over the road. And at the cafe, the woman there in the cafe asked him about what was going on. And then she offered to pray for him. And he said after that, it so impacted him that when he went back to the hospital, he said to his wife, we need to have her middle name Hope. I said, I also have a hope in God. And this kind of led into a little bit more of a discussion. He said he didn't believe, but I suspect that he had something there, and some seeds had been sown a while ago. And I pray that our little conversation would have carried that a little bit further along the path. So in Saline, there are 5 questions contained in the Saline training. So the first question is, why is faith important in healthcare? The second is, what are the opportunities for and the barriers to fulfilling God's call to being salt and light? So this is looking at the opportunities and barriers in me, in ourselves, and the opportunities and barriers in our patients. Thirdly, what is my part? And what tools will help me cultivate, sow, and harvest? So as I mentioned earlier, I pray as I journey to work that I'll be a blessing for my patients. And I've been learning to look for cultural and spiritual clues and cues that I might use to identify with my patient and be able to ask open questions that can lead on to further discussion. And most importantly, where to from here? And now I'll hand over to Carol. Thank you.
I hope that you've enjoyed this taste of saline process. As we wrap up this presentation, I'd like to introduce you to the International Saline Partnership. Saline process materials have been developed by an organization called IHS Global. IHS Global partners with 8 Christian healthcare professional organizations to share saline process concepts, tools, and materials with Christian healthcare workers around the world. The goal is to develop a growing global movement of Christian professional healthcare workers who are committed to living as salt and light, sharing the light and love of Jesus in their working community. Together, we can make a big impact in the world as we come together across professions and organizations. So what's next? I'd like to invite you to attend a full saline process witness training course. This course is about 10 hours in length. It can be conducted both virtually or in person. For those who are not able to attend a live course, there's a spot, the Saline Process Online Training Course. This is a web-based, self-paced study course that also shares about the concepts of saline process. For those who've completed a saline process witness training class, we encourage them to stay connected with those who trained them for ongoing coaching. Living as salt and light is a process for all of us, and we can learn so much from each other. And last but not least, there's community. We can join together with those who share a vision of living as salt and light to encourage each other, build up each other, and stay intentional and focused in answering God's call to be salt and light. This concludes the recorded portion of this taster. We invite you to join a live Q&A session where we can answer questions and talk more about saline process. We hope to see you there.